Please uncheck your camera box so that it's just your name and not your face, because we will have this as a free workshop on our website for people who could not attend or who couldn't figure out how to get on the Zoom. So, and Jennifer Stolzer has put something in the chat box. Unchecking your video box will prevent you from filming yourself in the bathroom, for example. If you need to get up and go to the restroom, you don't have to take us with you. We will put this entire presentation on the website in the next few days so that you have it just to reference back to. And the other thing is we will be taking a 5-minute break in between Ben and Jennifer's presentations, but feel free, because you are at home, just get up. We're not watching your video screens. We're not taking attendance, none of that. So just get up and go do what you need to do. As long as you keep yourself on mute, we won't know what you're doing. So that is just some Zoom information for you. Some other information I wanted to let you know about is all of our Writers Guild books and ebooks have been discounted on Amazon due to the quarantine. So we have a few books, picture book, our members anthology, our young writers anthology. We have quite a few things up through the Writers Guild, and they're all on our website, and it links to Amazon, or you can go to Amazon and search for St. Louis Writers Guild and find all of our things there. We also have a lot of stuff that's new on our Redbubble account, and Redbubble is where we get all of the swag. I should have made Steve wear his St. Louis Writers Guild jacket, but that's where we get all the St. Louis Writers Guild swag, is Redbubble, and there's also a link from our website to that. So I just wanted to tell you guys about that. Also, every Thursday night, we are going to have a virtual writer's salon, and we had one this past Thursday, and then last week was our first one. And we're really just getting together. You can discuss writing, you can ask questions about your work, you can ask people questions about what to do after you finished your work. It's a come as you go. You don't have to be on at a certain time. It's from 6 to 9. And the link is on the homepage of our website so that you can click on it. It's like Zoom. It's actually in WebEx and not Zoom, but it's just like this. You click on it and you can get in there every Thursday, and that's Central Time. I know we have someone in Washington today, so that's Central Time. Next month, our May workshop will also be presented virtually like this. We don't have the link up yet because we haven't set it up. We want to do this workshop first. So in the next couple of weeks, we'll set up our link for our virtual workshop for May. And the VLAA, I always mess that up, the VLAA is doing contracts, talking about contracts. And so we'll put that up, and you just click on it. Just some of you might have to download a program, because that one will be WebEx and not Zoom, but it's exactly like this. Next month too, on May 12th, is our open mic night. And our open mic night will be virtual because we're not meeting in person right now. So we will put up a link to the WebEx to do a virtual open mic night. The rules still apply. I'll have a sign-in sheet. I'll probably actually just make the chat log the sign-in sheet, so that if you want to read, you have 5 minutes for poetry, 7 minutes for prose, and we'll use the chat log as an order of people who are reading. And I will still be timing you even though we're virtual. So don't make me get the mute button out. So we will do that. We'll put that up on the homepage as soon as we get that all set up. We did have an open board meeting scheduled for today, and we have moved that to June tentatively. We're hoping by June we can get out and do more things, but we're just going day by day right now. The open board meeting is for any member to come to our board meeting and discuss what we're working on to make the Guild a better organization for you, even during these times when we're having to do everything virtual. What you can do to help the Guild, and just we'll be taking any questions you have about the future of the Guild and what you want to see for programming. So for right now, keep in mind the June workshop right before the workshop at 9:30, we'll have an open board meeting. So I think that is all of the announcements that I wanted to make. Do any of the other board members on here have any announcements? I think that was it. Okay. You don't type fast enough if you do. We're done. So I'm going to introduce our speakers today. Ben's actually going to go first. Ben Moeller-Gaa is your friendly neighborhood haiku poet from St. Louis. He is a pushcart nominee and author of the 2018 Touchstone Award winner for Wishbones. That's full-length collection of haiku and Sinryu. Close. As well as 3 chapter books. Ben, you can pronounce that for everybody. Fiddle on the Floorboards, Blowing on a Hot Soup Spoon, and the pushcart nominated Wasp Shadows are his 3 books. His poems have appeared in numerous journals and anthologies around the globe. He has a degree in creative writing from Knox College and works as a senior IT functional analyst for Millipore Sigma. He enjoys travel, music, art, and other worldly meanderings. Ben and Jennifer will put their websites up in the chat and any kind of social media or emails or other contacts. That way you guys have them. Ben's is benmoeller-gaa.com, but just so that it's spelled correctly, they'll put those up in the chat for you guys. So, Ben, are you ready?
Yes, I am.
All right. Let's welcome him. Everybody wave. You have camera.
Hello, everybody. So, talking about freedom in form, and what is really crazy is that if you would have asked me about, I don't know, 15 years ago that I would be doing a talk on freedom in form, I would have thought you were crazy because for, like, I think a number of people, when you think about formal poetry, it's one of those things that just feels stuffy, confining, like there's not a lot. It's more of a mental exercise. It's something that you just do. Maybe it's a writing prompt or something like that, and that's about it. And you know, I certainly felt that way for a long time, and now that I'm working 11 years in a specific form, haiku and its cousin senryu. I'm just going to talk about haiku today. Like I have the complete opposite perspective on it. But I was
Ben, we lost your audio. I think you clicked your mute button.
Okay.
There you go. You're back.
So what was the last thing I said? I don't know how long I was muted.
No, just a moment. You were talking about.
Okay.
Go back 2 sentences or 2 thoughts, and you're there.
I'm going to move my mouse very far away from the mute button if I happen to brush against my trackpad. So formal poetry. You know, I was trying to think why do we have this perception of it being really bland and really stifling and really not fun or engaging? And I think a lot of it has to do with how it's presented to us in school. And it reminds me a lot of how math was taught to me in school. I don't want to, and again, I'm not talking down on math or anything like that, but math, it was taught for me very much as, here's the equation, here's how the equation works, I'm going to give you a test on the equations, you fill out these sample equations, I grade to make sure you did the equation right, and then we move on to the next thing. Formal poetry very much was taught to me that way in class, where you'd have a writing class and you'd have, okay, today we're going to talk about haiku. It's a 575 format, write 3 haiku, 575, that's great. Next, we're going to talk about sonnets. Next, we're going to talk about sessinas. And you fill out the formula, you turn it in, and that's it. And you move on to the next thing. And so that's how people interact with it. That's how you engage with it. You're never really given any sort of context about what the poem is really, what it does, and why is what it is. Because every kind of form of poetry, unless it's purely made up by somebody just who was bored and looking to do something academic or was just trying to be creative, has a unique thing that it does, and it does that really well. And if you're writing in that form and it's not doing the thing that that form does, you're kind of missing the point. You're just filling out the equation without actually digging into the meat and figuring out what is this thing. For me, with haiku, I first got really introduced to contemporary English language haiku, or at least what it looked like back at Knox College. I was writing a bunch of different types of poems all over the place, with trying to figure out what it is I like to do, how I liked to do it. I knew I liked rhyming, I knew I liked meter, I knew I liked a lot of techniques, but then I started to write these really short poems. And my professor there, Cheryl St. Germain, book plugs, decided, said, well, you're kind of writing some sort of haiku-like stuff. Maybe you should check out this book, The Essential Haiku, Versions of Basho, Isa, and Busan, translated by this guy, Robert Haas. This was before he was the poet laureate. She studied under him, and she's like, well, I don't know a lot about this. This guy does, check this out. So I'm like, all right, I'll do that. I like books. And when I got this book and started leafing through it, the very first thing that I noticed was, these poems are not 575. How is that possible? This is Basho, this is Isa, this is Busan. How is that possible? There's this big, fat, thick book translated by one of the best poets in our country, and it's not 575. How is that possible? That's what a haiku is, right? I don't even know what I'm looking at here, because it doesn't follow the template I was taught. Well, it turns out there's a lot more to a haiku than that template, a whole lot more. And this book was my first opening to that. And I've been through it dozens and dozens of times, no joke, cover to cover. There are many books like this that I read once a year at least. And what this did was it was a real eye-opener to the idea that there's more to form than a format. Now, this book didn't necessarily tell me everything else that was going on in a haiku. It told me a lot about Basho, Busan, and Isa, and about their lives, and it was very informative that way, and sort of about how they moved and developed things, but it didn't really tell me about what a haiku was and how it really worked. I just knew that it resonated with me, that some of these poems were 6 words, and they were written 200-300 years ago, and they spoke to me as if, I entered them as if, I found my own life in them, and that just blew my mind. But I didn't really know why or how that was working. And so I tried writing some of these for a little while, but then kind of ran out of room. I didn't really know anybody else that was doing this. This was back in the days before Amazon.com. So if your local bookstores didn't carry something and you didn't know what to look for, it was hard to find. And I didn't spend a lot of time working out in the library to try to learn more about it. So I kind of put them away for a while. And then in about 2009, I was submitting all sorts of different kinds of poems to journals. And I found a list of journals that took online submissions, 2 of which were Acorn. At that point in time was edited by this person, Carolyn Hall. Really good book. I'll put these titles all in the chat at some point, as well as this journal, The Heron's Nest. This is a book called Nest Feathers, which is highlights of their first 15 years. And the editor I picked at that point was this lady, Peggy Lyles, and this is her book. And what was awesome is I found these. I'm like, well, I've got nothing to lose. It's email. I'll just send off this stuff. I think I got a good shot at this. I think I was onto something back then. Let me check this out. So I submitted the poems, and I got a no right away from Carolyn Hall. And I got a no from Peggy Lyles as well, from The Heron's Nest. But Peggy gave me a rejection with a punctuation mark, saying, hey, Mr. Ben, we appreciate you submitting your poems to our journal. And I'm paraphrasing just a little bit, but you obviously don't know what you're doing. you need to learn what you're doing before you ever think about submitting to us again. So if you're interested in learning, read some stuff like this book, Haiku, A Poet's Guide by Lee-Gerga. Read that book, try it again. And so I said, okay, challenge accepted. Because I was at a point in my life where I could hear what she was saying and not get mad, not get pissed off, not get like angry. Like, of course, what does this person know? Which would have been really dumb of me, because come to find out later, both of those ladies are like way awesome poets. And the fact that Peggy gave me some time a day, some insights, things to look at, was way generous of her. And so I read Haiku, A Poet's Guide, and I started to see, oh, I don't know what I'm doing. I think I know, but I really don't know. And there's a real difference between thinking you know what a form does and learning about what a form does. And once you've worked in a specific form for a period of time, it's really obvious when someone sends you a poem where they think they know what they're doing and they actually have no idea what they're doing. And that happens a lot, not just in haiku, but I've, go to a lot of poetry readings around town here and other places. And I was a contributing editor to River Styx literary magazine for 10 years. So I read The Slush Pile. And remember how I was talking about before, how a lot of, like in school, you get the assignment and you hit the formula and the teacher says, okay, write the sestina. Here's the formula, plug in your stuff, turn it in. Well, a lot of people get real excited that they completed the task and think that because they completed the task, then that's a worthy poem that needs to be shared and needs to be published. So they read it at a poetry reading or they submit it to journals. And again, I'm not talking about haiku, but it comes really obvious when your poem is about the format and not about being a good poem. And so I would suggest everybody, if you're trying to write in form, you got to move beyond the format before you can even think about submitting things places. Because those that understand what the form is, they're going to know. They're going to know. You're not going to be able to pull the wool over their eyes, and it's obvious to them. And maybe you'll get lucky and get somebody like Peggy that will say, okay, read something, read a book, and try again. So I read Haiku, A Poet's Guide, and I tried again. And with submissions like this, you submit 10 poems. So we're not talking about write one poem and try it out. We're talking 10. So I wrote 10 more, tried it again. She said, no. Okay, now read this book. Haiku Moment. Okay, nice, big, thick book. Read that book. I got that book. I read it. I'm like, damn, all right. I am still way off the mark here. And this has a really good introduction. It's a really good book. I wrote 10 more poems, tried it again. Said no. Now, Peggy never once told me what was wrong with my poems. Never gave me any specific details. She basically wanted me to figure it out. And the way that she made me figure it out is, okay, now read this book. Big, thick book, 900 poems, more. And I did. I wrote 10 more poems. And we went through this one more time before finally I got one of the 10 from this fourth submission. So that's 40 poems that I ended up writing that ended up making it through the editorial panel for the Aaron's Nest, and it got published. And that was awesome. And in that time when I was going through and reading and studying and writing and trying to figure out what was going on, I got hooked on this damn form. And from 2009 till now, that's all I read. That's all I work with. I submit regularly to over 20 to 30 journals consistently, like every issue that they allow you to submit. I'm reading those issues. I'm reading books. I'm reading poets. I'm going to conferences. It's an amazing world. And it's not something that anybody would have ever said, oh, that's worthwhile. Because to most people, when I was starting out getting interested in this stuff, said, it's just a little 575 poem, big deal. What's the point? You know, it's not real stuff. It's not free verse. It's not the real thing. It's this little form. It's like, well, maybe there's more here. Maybe there's more going on to this form than you know about. And so that's when I started to dig deeper. And like I said, started reading books and books and rereading them. And not only the poems, but the great introductions and And these are those three books that I held up before, and again, I'll put them in the chat here. Haiku, A Poet's Guide by Moeller-Gaa, the Haiku Anthology by Cor van den Heuvel, the third edition. I also have the second edition, which was very good. It was recommended to me to read by Moeller-Gaa, and Haiku Moment by Bruce Ross, all available are on Amazon or any online bookseller. And what they showed me is that what else is going on besides 575? And really the poets that have been working on in haiku seriously for the last 50 some years, not just in English language, but all over the world, had come to the conclusion that, okay, well, linguistically, we cannot replicate what happens in Japanese. And in the 19th century, when Japan opened up and the linguists came in and everyone's like, let's explore this culture. Oh, they have this great literary tradition that goes back hundreds and hundreds of years. It's really integrated into the society. How do they do it? Well, they started translating based on language, on linguistics. And the Japanese onji is kind of like a syllable. So we'll just use that, use the syllables and go forward. Turns out, you know, the word haiku in English is 2 syllables. The word haiku in Japan is 3 onji. It doesn't make sense. So turns out there's a lot more to a haiku than just that. So poets started to look at everything else that made a haiku. And we have this wonderful breadth of global literature now around that form. And so what is that? What if it's not 575, what is that? Well, we'll go back to when I was reading those translations by Robert Haas and was finding that I'm able to relate to these poems, these moments, you know, in a very personal way that was really surprising to me. It was very different from the other poems that I was reading in school, very different from the other poems that I was, you know, experiencing, because I was entering these poems and I was seeing things in these poems, and it didn't really matter who Issa was or who Basho was or Busan. It was these poems were connecting with me in a very specific way. And it turns out that is one of the things that a haiku does, that is within the DNA of the haiku, is that a haiku isn't complete until somebody other than the poet reads them. Think about that. A poem, in this case, this type of poem isn't complete until somebody other than the poet reads it. That's not normal. That's not how normal stuff works. That we usually think about poetry specifically, or other art forms, as, you know, it's, you have the creator is the auteur. They are the person that's showing you their unique vision. If they want you to see something, they're going to put in their camera lens. I want you to see my specific eyeball, and I want you to see it in this way, with this background noise, with all of these details, because that's my vision. That's what I want to say. And I love that stuff. And it's got, you know, I'm not here to bash that or say anything about that, but haiku works completely the opposite. Haiku works in that it presents something to the reader, and the reader enters into this poem and fills it in with everything else that they have, with their whole life story. And I'll give you an example, and we'll get into some details, some nitty-gritty details here. Basho has a famous frog poem, An Old Pond, a frog jumps in, the sound of water, which is very nice. That's been translated into many different ways. But I'm not here to talk about Basho's frog poem. I'm here to talk about Ben's frog poem. And my frog poem, which is in my book Wishbones, plug, is a 3-liner. And I'll show you what it looks like in calligraphy in the book, and then I'll read it and go through it. So the poem goes like this. A little frog on our sundial, passing time. I'll say it again. A little frog on our sundial, passing time. Now, this poem short. It's less than 17 syllables. It is 3 lines, but will not follow 5-7-5 if you were counting on your fingers. But it uses language, it uses haiku language. And I break down haiku language into 3 S's: simple, succinct, and suggestive. And what do those mean? So simple. So in this poem, all the words are very simple. They are not that you have to have 1-syllable words, but they're simple. A little frog on our sundial passing time. You know, you have a very brief moments to engage a reader. The moment you put up a wall, the moment you're going to turn the page. So you need to be simple. You need to speak plainly. It's not about the fancy language. Now, that's S for simple. Now, the second S, succinct, seems kind of obvious. You're writing short, but what does that mean exactly? It means is really holding back on details. The only real descriptor you have in this whole poem is that the frog is little. That's pretty much it. There are no details in this poem at all. So you don't get overly bogged down on trying to define your images. What does that do? That gets into the third S, which is the hardest and the most rewarding, and where the real meat of writing in haiku comes from, which is the suggestive part of this of the poem. Now, what do we mean by that? Not meaning sexy, although there are sexy haiku, but suggestive means just that. It's you put in the right words in the right way that it suggests to a reader a moment. A haiku is essentially a moment that unfolds in the present tense in the real time. It is a single moment. It is not a string of moments. It is not something that happens in the past. It's not something that happens in the future. It is something that happens now, in the eternal now. I mean, that could be now that happens at night, and technically if you're reading in the daytime, it's not happening as you're reading it, but the moment itself unfolds in the real time. This poem unfolds in real time. And suggestive language says what? Okay, so if we go in this line, the 2 images in the poem, which is a little frog and a sundial, like I said, the only thing you know about the frog is that it's little. That's it. But let's see, we have 19 people on the call, excluding myself. Well, actually including myself. If I went around and asked everybody to define their frog, to tell me what their frog looks like, everyone could do so in great detail. And nobody's frog is going to look exactly alike. And that's the point. That's how you have entered into this poem. You have entered into this moment, and you have started to complete it. The haiku understands and relies on the reader to know what a frog looks like. And so it allows you to use your own frog. Same thing with sundial. I mean, my gosh, how many different kinds of sundials are there? Is it ceramics, is it brass, is it concrete, is it on a pedestal, is it on the ground, is it hanging on a wall? What is it? I don't know. The poem doesn't tell you, but you know. Intrinsically, when you heard that, you went to some place specific. You connected where the frog is in relation to that sundial. And in your mind, you created where this is. I mean, the poem doesn't tell you what time of day it is, but it suggests it. With the inclusion of a frog and a sundial, most people would assume the day, but I've actually talked to a couple grade school classes, and a kid said, well, it's full moon at night. Fair enough, worked within the logic of the poem. A full moon at night, you would see a frog, you could see a sundial working as the moon moved across it. But the thing is that all of those details around the frog and the sundial aren't important to the poem, because the poem is not about the frog or the sundial. The poem is about passing time. That's the moment. That's the thing. That's what happens in the poem, is that somebody, in this case, the poet, but you become the surrogate of the poet. You enter that moment, and what do you see? First thing you see is a little frog. You, as the reader, then connect, I see a little frog on our sundial. Oh, so it's on our sundial, meaning my sundial, passing time. Huh, how about that? Yeah, that's what the frog's doing. That's what's happening on the sundial. That's what they're doing together. It's passing time. It's amazing. And this little moment, this little discovery, like, oh, wow, that. And that's kind of how haiku works. It's a moment that unfolds in present tense. It uses simple, succinct, and suggestive language to get you into the moment. And it allows you to become a participant in the poem. You complete it. And this is like, this blew my mind, you know, this notion that you could write poems in such a way that would allow me to not be the central figure of the piece. So often when I would be writing before, I would have to think, well, what do I want to say? You know, and I would read poems and narrative poems or essay type poems and about people talking about their lives or their experiences. And I was never really comfortable doing that. I really had a hard time talking about my specific personal details of my life. And with haiku, because I'm not the central figure of the poem, in fact, what I am is I'm a human that's engaged in the world, that's experiencing the world around me as I see it, and writing that down so that somebody else can also see and make those same connections that I made, but make them in whatever context that they themselves find them in. Like in one of my writing groups, there's a person there that every time she reads a lot of my poems, she immediately gets, for whatever reason, sees them all taking place on her parents' farm when she was a kid. You know, I was never a 7-year-old girl living on a farm, but my poems consistently take this person there. And so that's another amazing thing about this form, is that when you pick up, you know, a thick book like this and you're reading through it, you know, poet after poet after poet after poet, I mean, you're not only getting to experience all of these wonderful images and stuff, but like just on a different kind of level. Very often, like, I don't even really care who's writing the poem. I just care about the poem. I care about the moment. And that's, again, a different kind of mindset of where so often, especially in our current celebrity culture environment, where it's often like, who's that person? You know, I just watched a really great documentary on Netflix on Miles Davis and about his mystique and about, you know, the magic and aura of this creative genius. And that's not something that happens so much in the world of haiku. You don't necessarily, I mean, you look at those 3 Japanese masters, but what those Japanese masters will tell you is that it's not about me. You know, you don't read the poems to learn about those poets. You read those poets to learn about life and learn about how we live as humans and how we connect with this world. And that's something that was really powerful for me, not just as a writer, but also as a person. And so I think that with any kind of writing, you need to find that thing, whether it's a genre, whether it's a form or something that really speaks to you on a level beyond just it being poetry. And this idea of a human connection, that it doesn't matter what your gender is, it doesn't matter where you are in the world, what time period you're in. If the poem works, it's going to work, and it's going to work as true today as it would tomorrow, as it would 100 years ago. And what having a form like this does is that it also allows you, it gives you kind of walls to rub up against in a way. Like, I find that I work really well within limitations. So with a lot of free verse poems, sometimes it gets hard to know, well, when is it really done? When is it really good? When is it good to you, but maybe this other person just doesn't get it? I don't know. We kind of make up these rules as we go along. There's not any sort of guidelines. It can be whatever it wants to be. But when you work within a form, you kind of have these guidelines. And with haiku, it's not 5-7-5 anymore, but it's a poem of a single breath. It's 2 images. It's a juxtaposition of 2 images. In my frog poem, you had the little frog and you had the sundial. And those 2 together don't mean anything until you have, and there are many techniques to get this across, but in this case, it uses a 3rd line, which is a cutting line, which makes the first 2 images become more than the sum of their parts. Suddenly, the juxtaposition of a little frog on a sundial has context because it's about passing time, and that's the moment. And there it is. And once you dig deeper into this form, I mean, there are so many different tricks and techniques to get that across. That one uses 2 images with the third line being the cutting line. But if you're using that technique, that cutting line could be the first line, it could be the second line, it could be straddle between the two lines, it doesn't matter. And there are more types of haiku than just a 3-line haiku. There's a 1-line, there's a 2-line, there's 3-line, there's a vertical straight up and down. There are, I've seen some interesting things with concrete type things going on. Not for beginners, but there's a never-ending room of opportunity in this form. For me, like, I've been doing this for 11 years. I've had over 800 poems published in over 50 journals around the world, several chapbooks and books and stuff. And I feel like I'm just scratching the surface. Like, I've now gotten to a point where I can internalize the rules. I can see where I am. I know where I am in any poem, but I don't necessarily know, like, why or how. Or and it's like riding a bike. Like, I had a great did a couple biking trips in Europe, and one of them was in Ireland, and I think this works really well in the northern County Donegal, which is very hilly, especially from the Midwest, very hilly. But some of these hills, you start off at the bottom and you're riding up and you're thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going to get to the top. And we're at the top, we're at the top, we're at the top. And you get to the top and then there's more hill. You just couldn't see it because it was at a slightly different degree of angle. And with haiku, there's always more hill. There's always another thing you can do. And you need to also engage in the form, in other people writing in the form, whatever you're doing. Read the journals, if it's not a journal dedicated to a specific form, but they publish a lot of that, read those journals, because every new issue of Acorn that comes out, every new issue of the Heron's Nest that comes out, or Frog Pond, or Modern Haiku, or Shamrock, or Wales Haiku Journal, or a World Haiku Review, or I could name a dozen more. People are doing interesting new things with this juxtaposition of images, doing interesting new things with how they break lines, with how they've solved problems that I've been trying to figure out myself. And it's just this never-ending supply of amazing images, and you get to experience and be taken places that it's just amazing. It's fascinating. And so when I get to sit down to write, I will start with a journal. And I'll start reading poem after poem, or an anthology, because I need to shut out myself. I need to get away from my own head. I never sit down with an idea of what I want to write. I always when I quiet myself, I let what's around me dictate what I'm going to work on, because those are the interesting things. They don't come from me, they come from outside me. And so you tend to write seasonally, not because it's important to the poem, but because you're alive in your presence. And I can't not write poems about spring right now, with things blooming and the rain's coming and the temperature's rising and the days getting longer. You can't avoid that. And when you're present, those enter into your work. And poems, they're short, but man, I've had some of these poems that have taken over 100 drafts to get right. That frog poem, for example, I spent a lot of time on that and got it to a point where it was exactly as I presented it to you, but it didn't have the word little in the first line. It was just a frog on our sundial passing time. And after about the 6th journal that rejected it, I'm like, I know there's something in this poem, but I just can't figure out what's wrong. And I don't know if it was something else I was reading or what, but it dawned on me that I needed to add the word little. And once I added the word little, suddenly that frog becomes interesting. It's succinct. It's just enough information to make you pause and take notice of a frog that you might have not noticed before, simply because it was little. And it's learning little tricks and details like that, getting the right balance, and really crafting and really rewriting and rewriting and working and reading, that not only will get you hooked on a form, because there's a lot of puzzle solving, and it engages like the creative part of your brain, but then like the analytical part of your brain is like, how do I figure this out? What's the tension? Where does it need to move? And all of that happens before you really start submitting. And getting published and stuff. But that pretty much covers what I wanted to talk about. I know it's a little early, but I didn't know how this was going to work in a room where I'm just talking to a camera and I don't, you know, there's nothing to bounce around off of. But since we have some time, I don't know if we can open it up to some questions. You can unmute yourself and so on. That would be great.
If you guys have any questions, just type them in the chat and then we'll read them and answer the question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do see other people in the chat box talking about other, like a Mary Oliver book about rules for the dance, which is good. I'm glad people liked somewhat the book covers. Yeah, that could have been good PowerPoints, but there's also something different though, being able to show you like this book. This is a really small book. It's a really large book. I don't know. I'm fascinated with book sizes and you know, this is a thick book, thinner book, and you don't get that by PowerPoint, but that's, I take that to heart if I have to do this again. Let's see, some other things I can think about. Like if I was going to recommend a good book, like a beginner book that I think does a really good job with not only having a good introduction that explains haiku, but also just a really beautiful book. It's this one. This is one that I don't actually write in. And it's called Haiku, Ancient and Modern by Jackie Handy. And what's beautiful about this book, besides just having a great cover and it being this nice little square, is that it's divided into 5 sections, and they go along the 5 Taoist wood, fire, and so forth. And they're just really nice because there's just 2 poems, sometimes 1 poem on a page, and it has really nice illustrations that come from Japanese art, which is great. And it mixes people from all time periods. So you'll get Basho in here, but you also get Lee Gurga, and you'll get Cor van den Heuvel, and you'll get they're just side by side. So it's showing you as that the poems from yesterday, like moves. I mean, there are people from all over the last 300 years in there, all mingling together, and they mingle beautifully. They mingle beautifully because people are following. That go beyond a 5-7-5, and they get to the heart of what this genre does and what it does well and how it's supposed to work. And it's just it's a really nice book to have in your bookshelf and to flip through and to read. And I guarantee you, if you pick it up, you'll get through it all the way through, and probably you'll come back to it again. So I have a question here. So how have you changed from working within the structure of haiku? How do you react to the language of poets? Well, how do I react to the language of poets? Since I only work, this is from Amy, since I just work within haiku, I react to the language of poets. Are they using it correctly? Now, granted, the nice thing about reading anthologies and journals and books is that all of these people are using it correctly. I'd be wary of that though. If you go into a bookstore and you pick up a collection of haiku, I would recommend looking at it first. And if you notice that everything is written in 5-7-5, maybe look for a different one. And that would be a clue. But so since everyone's working in the way that I've described it here, I get excited by what people are doing, how they're using the language, how they're using the kind of those 3 S's that I mentioned: simple, succinct, and suggestive, to take me places. And again and again and again, I'm delighted to read to read all of these poems and to reread them. Every time I pick up a new issue like Acorn, I'll read it 3 times before it goes to the bookshelf. you know, so I have plenty of time to like all my likes at least 3 times. And every time I go back through, I find different poems that I like more than others. And I'm always, because I'm reading it, the day is different, my mood is different, everything is different about me. Every time I read something, I come at it from a slightly different point of view, and I learn something new about myself, especially if you find a poem that from a book you've read 7 times, and this is the 7th time, and that one poem finally speaks to you. And it also reaffirms the things that I like, because there'll be a poem I liked every 7 times I've read the book. Another question. You described your gateway to haiku. Has it changed the way you see things just in your life? Is everything a haiku now when you observe it? Yes, it does. It does change your life. I can't speak for all forms, but for haiku especially, because it does give you permission to slow down, to take time and set it aside, to really just look around and appreciate and see things as they are, not as that you want them to be. Another thing in haiku is that if you encounter a bird, for example, the bird can only do what a bird can do. The bird is not, you're not allowed to personify that bird. You're not allowed to make the bird have conversations with you in a way that you would have a conversation with another person. The bird can only make sounds, can only react, can only do what it does. And that's not to limit you as a writer. It's not to say, oh, you can't do that because we're putting a limitation on you. No, the reason is because that bird by itself should be enough. That bird exists. It's there, it's alive. It is there regardless if you're there or not. Look at what it does. Listen to how it sounds. Look at how it behaves. That's enough. You don't need to color it with anything else. If you do that, then it becomes not about you. The poem becomes about you. And that's not what haiku are supposed to be about. They're not about you. When you're doing your job as a haiku poet, the poet fades into the background and is not really present. So if it's a poem about a bird, then a moment that involves a bird, then the bird has to be the bird. It can't be an avatar for you or a friend of yours or somebody else. And that's not to say that, like, if you're, your cat, I have lots of cat poems, but my cat is nothing, it is the cat. It's the personality of the cat. It's not a person. I don't speak about the cat as anything other than what the cat does. And they're fascinating creatures, as they are. They don't need to be anything else. And so it allows you to really, pay attention. Like, I remember early on when I would sit out in a hammock in the backyard of my old house, and I would really just sit down and really pay attention to stuff. And I'd look over at the grass that was, it's green, which was good. But then you really start to look, well, what's happening in that green? And I noticed just how many little green things made up that lawn, that some was grass, some was not grass. And then I became really fascinated with this little microcosm of the world that was happening there. And then you sit still long enough, and then you see everything that's going on in that grass, the different kinds of bugs, the different kinds of little flowers. You start noticing which birds come to your backyard, at what time they come to your backyard, and what quantity they come to your backyard. The grackles come and they like scour the yard in a certain way, and then the starlings come, and you notice that there's the pair of cardinals that come, and when you see one without the other, you notice that it has a certain call, that it calls back to one another. They look for each other, and you start to notice these things that you would never pay attention to otherwise. And it's absolutely wonderful. It really gives you a much greater appreciation for the world around you, because you're not thinking about you. You're just observing. You're just watching the world happen around you, and it's enough. A couple other questions here. In many poems, the verb seems the most powerful part of speech. Does that hold true in haiku? No, I wouldn't say that I wouldn't specify it's a verb. It's the juxtaposition. It's the it's the tension between images and how that tension is carried out. So it's not specifically verb specific. You don't want to use adverbs. That's for sure. You want to avoid that. and you want to avoid big, you know, limit your descriptions and allow things to be as they are. And that's a challenge. You might, it's hard. It's a hard form to work in because you have to disconnect yourself from a lot of the tools that you normally use in a lot of writing to put yourself forward and to color things the way you see it. But to roll back and see things as they are and notice things as they happen, it's a good mental exercise, but it's also hard. See, not language of poets, language poets. So, I mean, to clarify your question, like the focus of language versus meaning with language. Well, I don't know exactly how to answer that question, Amy, because in haiku, the words, you need to use the right words to describe things as they are. So the use of language is, it's not a code, it's not metaphor, it's not, you're not using necessarily the poem to say, like in a play, like the thing is never the thing in theater. In this case, usually the cigar kind of is just the cigar. It's the moment of smoking the cigar. And granted, in the context of what's happening in the image in a moment, that can lead you places, but you're not using, your language has to be very clear. And that's another thing that's a challenge, because in longer poems, you can hide a bad line. You can sometimes hide the fact that you might not know exactly what's going on in the poem, but it's got a good feel to it. And therefore, when you're done with it, you're like, oh, it's kind of all right. There's no place to hide in a haiku. It's got to work or it doesn't. And it's obvious when it does, and it's really obvious when it doesn't, especially to somebody that's really into the form. All great questions. Thank you so much. And it looks like we're at a good time to maybe take our break, 10:55.
Okay, I'm unmuted now. Yeah, we can take a break for about 5 minutes. That was my cat being crazy.
Wow.
There's two of them.
Where was she?
No, they're brothers. They wrestle all the time. So we'll take a break until 11 and we'll switch over to Jennifer. And when we come back at 11, I'll introduce Jennifer. And then we'll get going with the last half. So thank you, Ben. Everybody wave if you have camera.
Thank you so much. This was
We're not clapping. That's our clapping. So we're going to remain muted, everybody, especially with these guys running around. And then I'll come back on at 11. And then, Ben, if you wanted to put anything in the chat for any of the books that you were talking about or resources, or if you happen to see any other questions before you come up, you can just chat them back there in the chat. So we'll take a break for a few minutes and we'll come on back. So I am going to introduce Jennifer, and we're going to do the same thing that we did with Ben. Is if you guys have any questions, you can put them up in the chat, and she's going to do her presentation and then answer some questions. So looks like we've got all the questions from Ben answered, and so he's got some stuff he's going to put up in there. So I'd like to introduce Jennifer Lynn. She is a soul midwife, shamanic druid priestess, and a modern day mystic specializing in Celtic mystical techniques and practices. Jennifer gives voice to her bardic craft through poetry and prose. Her award-winning poems have appeared in magazines and journals internationally, including the Beltane Papers, Rowan Press, Sage Woman, and Sacred Hoop magazine. And she was selected as a 2012-2013 featured poet for Sabella Poetry magazine. Jennifer is the author of the mystical fiction series Bree McLeod's story, Being Here, Coming Home, and The Chalice and the Blade. And her first nonfiction book, A Year and a Day, is scheduled for release in 2020, so she'll be able to tell us more about that and if it has or when it will come out. Her writings explore the rhythms of life while honoring the goddess and the sacred conversion. Jennifer is also a Chinese medicine practitioner and a minister of the Circle of the Sacred Earth, a Church of animism, fostering shamanic principles and practices. So she'll put up her website through shaman's eyes, .wordpress.com on the chat and all for social media and emails and things that she wants you to have. And I'll give a wave to Jennifer.
Hello, everyone. Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Is the sound okay? Yeah? All right, good. Thanks, Jessica, and thanks, Ben. Ben and I, we've known each other for a while. In fact, we were in a writing group together, and I love to hear him talk about haiku, and even to get into discussions with him about writing poetry and writing in general. He just has a really great vision and ear for working within a structure and allowing something to emerge in freedom from that structure, which it's part of what I do in my writings as well. I've been writing since I was very young. I entered my first poetry contest when I was 10 years old. And I've tried just about every form of poetry. I dabbled a little bit in haiku, but it was never my strength. I'll leave those to Ben. I've done a lot of free verse. I still do from time to time. I've worked with iambic pentameter and sonnet structure. I've worked with all kinds of different forms. And recently a friend of mine introduced me to the Ghazal, and he's actually here in attendance today. So I'm honored to have him here. But one of the things that I enjoy, I know a lot of people really shy away from writing poetry within a structure, within a form, because they feel like it's very limiting, it's very restricting. And people will say, you know, I like that I can do anything with my languaging and within free poetry and free verse. But a lot of times what the form does, and Ben was kind of talking about this, is it gives you the structure. It gives you the container from within which to work that then allows you to really explore your own voice. Whether it's the voice, like Ben was saying with haiku, of what haiku expresses, that snapshot of a moment of existence, or whether it's something else depending upon the different form. But knowing, when you get to know the pattern, the structure, the requirements of a given form, and you really take them in, it's almost like the structure of a meditation or the structure of a spiritual practice, or a structure of a routine. It offers you anchors and roots that within that, like Ben said, you can kind of bounce around a little bit and explore the voice and explore the beauty of life within that, and then allow the voice to emerge. As Jessica mentioned, I'm a shamanic practitioner. I'm a shamanic druid priestess. And all of my writing honors the goddess and the sacred conversation. And so I write from this very esoteric practice. And a lot of times it's very difficult to give structure to that. And what I enjoy about the form, writing within a form specifically, and especially the Ghazal form, which I'm going to talk about today, is that I can bounce around, I can find that beautiful mystical vision, and then come back to those roots, the container of the form itself. And it allows me to bring into the physical something which is very esoteric and ethereal. I went a little more structured than Ben did. I actually did put together a PowerPoint for my conversation. And I'm going to just hop on here and do my screen share so I can talk you through that. Where am I here? Oh, wait a minute. Sorry, slight technical difficulty. Let me just get into the slideshow format. There we are. Oh no. All right. So can everybody see that? Does everybody have the first slide up on the screen? All right, thanks, appreciate that. So I want to talk to you today about the poetic form that's called the Ghazal. And it's spelled G-H-A-Z-A-L, but it's pronounced kind of like Ghazal, but with a slight ululation within the G. So Ghazal, kind of a soft H sound with the Ghazal. And it's a form of amatory poem or ode. It expresses love, especially unrequited love or the longing for the beloved. It's originally, it's an Arabic form of poetry, and it gained renown between 661 and 750 AD. So it's been around for a little while. It's changed over the years, but it has continued to flourish up to the present day. Like I said, it's initially from the Arabic languages, and it emerged alongside the mystical practices of Sufism. Over time, as Sufism, part of the practice of Sufism is that yearning for the beloved, the longing for the beloved. And that's actually what the Sufis are yearning for, what the expression of that whirling dervish dance that you see on the screen is, that spinning and turning. It's a way of connecting into that deep yearning and that deep longing. So it's been around a while. It started within the Sufi Arabic areas, and then it spread worldwide. Why is this suddenly going ahead on me? In medieval Spain, ghazals were written in Hebrew as well as Arabic, and they've been dated as far back as the 11th century. Ghazals also appeared early on in most Arabic languages and a number of major West African languages too. I'm going to show you a few slides of traditional couplet ghazals written in their source languages, just to kind of give you a feel of what it looks like. So the ghazal was introduced into Iran in the 10th century, and that birthed a new form, the Persian ghazal. And the poet Rudaki, he lived 858 through 941 CE, is considered the most important Persian ghazal of this period. So again, it just kind of gives you a feel for the ancientness of this format. During the 12th and 13th centuries, the form continued to evolve. Poetic innovations of that era created what we now recognize as the archetypical ghazal form. I'm going to talk about that form a little more in depth in just a few minutes. But one of the innovations that arose around this time was the practice of mentioning the poet's name in the final couplet. And this practice had been around, had been an accepted addition to the form prior to this, but by the end of the 13th century, it became a requirement. So the ghazal then spread from Persia into South Asia, and the 13th century poet and musician Amir Khusro is considered the first Urdu poet. So again, these were just a couple of images of ghazals in their native languages. As I mentioned, the ghazal is an amatory poem or an ode. Unconditional love is the dominant theme of the ghazal. And that love can be for a higher being, a deity of some kind, God, goddess, creator, the sacred. It can also be for a mortal beloved, and it can be expressed for a man or for a woman. Within the tradition of the poetic form, love is viewed as that which completes a human being. Love lifts a person into the ranks of the wise and brings satisfaction to the soul of the poet. The yearning for love is the essence of this form. Whether requited or no, hey now, you're jumping ahead of me. Whether requited or no, unconditional love drives the poet and births the poem. And the experience of love, love as life, is also part of the original form. While the form doesn't forbid it, traditional ghazals rarely express explicit sexual desire. The love is usually depicted as spiritual. And like I said, it can be directed toward a man or toward a woman. So one of the more notable ghazal poets who is known today is Rumi. So I've included a couple poems of Rumi's to kind of give you a feel. Here you can see the traditional form. It's written in couplets. The stanzas are written in couplets. There's actual Arabic terms for these things, and I'm not going to use them because they're a little bit confusing. So I'm just going to kind of give it to you in straight up plain language. If you get inspired by this and you want to explore the Ghazal more, I encourage you to learn them, because there's a certain richness of context, again, that starts to weave into the structure itself. But just for an introduction, they're a little bit confusing. So you can see, oh, why does this keep jumping on me? Okay, so you can see that the stanzas are written as couplets, 2 lines each. And traditionally, there's at least 5 or 6 stanzas, but there can be more. I've seen traditional ghazals that go on for pages and pages and pages. And there's also a rhyming that is required, although you don't really see it here. Traditionally, the first stanza has the same word or phrase at the end of both lines of the couplet, and then the second line of each subsequent couplet has the same word or phrase. That you can play with that a little bit as we move into more of the modern use of the form, but this gives you a good feel for what it looks like. So other notable poets, Ghazal poets, are Hafiz, and I have another poem of his, and Sadi Shirazi of Persia, Mirza Khalib. These are some names that you may come across, and Fuzuli also. He wrote during the Ottoman Empire. And I have one Hafiz here that I thought was incredibly appropriate given what's going on in our world today. May we all catch the happy virus, right? Not that virus, but the happy virus. All right. So again, it expresses, here you can really see that expression of the loving of life, right? That the great experience of the love making that is the sacredness of life that we experience. Okay. So today, the Ghazal is one of the most popular poetic forms across the Middle East and South Asia. But how did this Arabic language form and wend its way into the English language and into the English poetic arts? The Ghazal became very popular in Germany during the 19th century through the poet Goethe, as well as Friedrich Rückert and August von Platen. They wrote between the mid-1700s and late 1800s. The Kashmiri poet Agha Sahid Ali was a big proponent of the form, and he even released a volume of ghazals in English. Nevertheless, the form was kind of slow to take hold amongst English listeners. Come on now. I'm sorry, this is moving ahead on me for some reason. So finally, in the 1990s, the ghazal started to gain some recognition as a viable English language poetry form. This is mainly thanks to some notable American poets, including John Hollander, W.S. Merwin, and Elise Pashan, and the Kashmiri American poet Agha Sahid Ali. On the screen right now is a modern example of the classical ghazal form. Again, you can see there's a minimum of 5 or 6 couplets, and each maintains the same rhythm and meter throughout the poem. And also you can see here in this example that classic rhyming structure that I mentioned. The first couplet ends in clouds and rain, and then the ending of each subsequent couplet is clouds and rain. And in this case, this poet actually used that as the title as well, which is not unusual. So another American poet, Robert Bly, he adapted the traditional form to create what's been called the tercet ghazal. And this is the ghazal form that I use to write. This is an example here on the screen of one of his really classic tercet ghazals. So a traditional ghazal, like we've seen, is composed of couplets, right? 5 or more. And Robert Bly, he believed that the couplet didn't accurately capture the English language and the American rhythms of expression. So he modified the form. And instead of couplets, he created stanzas of 3 lines each. In the tercet form, Bly maintained the traditional rhyming pattern. So again, you can see here the first stanza, the end of the first line in the first stanza is dawn, as well as the concluding word in that first stanza is dawn. And then likewise throughout each subsequent stanza, the final word is dawn, at dawn. Well, no, most of them are at dawn. One of them's the dawn. So you have this repetition of a key phrase, of a key concept. And often that concept is in some way the structure of the poet, of the poem, the container of the poem. It holds an energy. It's like the washing of the shore for me. It almost feels like the washing of the ocean shore, that it comes back and it returns and it comes back and it returns, and it bathes through you over and over and over again. So, and each of these stanzas, the tercets here in Robert Bly's form, each one of them in the Ghazal form is a standalone poem. Each stanza is unique to itself. It belongs to the greater poem by an interconnectedness of concept, theme, or expression of longing or loving, and by that repeated word or phrase at the end of the stanza. It's like to me, each one of these stanzas, it is a little mini poem. They're written separately, and to me, they're like the haiku. They're like snapshots, right? They're little snapshots, little tastes of whatever that repeating phrase is that keeps washing over you and washing over you and washing over you. So these tercets, each one of these individual stanzas, they can be written in one sitting. Sometimes I will actually sit down and I'll have, the concept will arrive to me. It's like I'll see an image of one movement that I see within the universe and that I experience. And then the tercets each arise as one moment, one snapshot of what that energy, what that vibration is in the experience of life. And sometimes I can sit down and the tercets come out, one after another, after another, after another. That's not always the order that they end up being in my poems. But sometimes you write these over time. You'll write a couple of tercets one day, a couple the next week, a couple of the next month. They can even be written over the span of years. And a fellow Ghazal poet that I know, he actually writes one stanza a day. And then over time, he goes back and he kind of works through them and reads through them and lets them sit with him. And then he pulls them together once he finds that uniting energy, that uniting rhythm. Sometimes he has to modify some of his stanzas in order to get that repeated phrase. Although sometimes that is one rule of the stanza format that you can actually, you can actually bend from time to time. They don't always have to finish with that same rhyming line. And doing that, working, I've often been impressed with that. I tried doing that one time, just like writing one stanza, one tercet a day for a month, and then trying to find themes within it. For me, it was very difficult. It's something that I don't work with poems that way. Poems work me more organically. But doing this adds a really interesting depth to the Ghazal format, because it offers the voice of loving and the voice of experiencing the loving of life and the lovemaking of life over time and through space. And that is another aspect of the Ghazal format. This is about the experience of the breath of life, of the sacredness of life, of the connection between you and the sacred, and that sacred conversation as it flows, as the sacred sings to you and you sing back to the sacred, and then the experience of that in manifestation in your day-to-day life. All right. So traditional ghazals require that all of the couplets of a poem adhere to the same rhythm and meter. And here the tercet ghazal is a little bit stricter. Each line of the stanza must be 12, or in a pinch, 13 syllables. And you can see that here. This is an example of one of my poems. Robert Bly also encourages within the tercet ghazal format that the lines of a stanza rap, meaning that they flow from one line into another. You can see that here in the first couple of stanzas. Each line of the stanza it's not a single sentence. It flows, wraps through. Punctuation in a ghazal, like most other poetry, is, well, that's up to the poet. So finally, the closing stanza, or the second to the last stanza, tercet, should include a reference to the poet. This can be an inclusion of the poet's actual name, a nom de plume, or some term of endearment that implies the presence of the poet. This is also a reflection of what's considered to be the traditional Ghazal form, and Robert Bly has kept it here in the tercet form. You can see that here in the final paragraph, or the final stanza of this poem. The author references, the poet references himself. He uses his name, Jim. And my name, Jennifer, is syllabically expensive. So I substitute an endearment. I use a store. And this saves me a syllable, right? And it also adds an interesting duality, as the term can refer to me, Jennifer, but it can also refer to you, the reader. And this is another aspect of the Ghazal, is these blurring of meanings within the stanzas, within these little mini poems, and within the full poem itself, is that there's often places where the words that are there can mean more than one thing. Like the haiku, the image that arises, that is birthed out of each one of these stanzas, can be different things to different people. And if you read it just slightly differently, you'll get a different meaning from it too, with a slightly different emphasis or a slightly different approach to the phrasing. A new image of life that is still consistent with the overall theme will emerge out of the poem. So where am I here? I think I'm here. As a shamanic druid priestess, my writings explore the rhythms of life while honoring the goddess and what my ancestors call the sacred conversation. Like I was saying, it's that song that the sacred sings to you and you sing back to the sacred, and then what emerges and is birthed out of that. One of my teachers is very fond of saying, one of my mystical teachers is very fond of saying, you know, your soul is the divine's gift to you. What you make of it and offer back is your gift to the divine. And in a way, this is what my poetry is. This is me hearing the song of the sacred, seeing it in my life, and then singing it back in this, using this mystical formula, poetic form. So my poetry, my Ghazal works especially, are a form of love talking. It's what the Irish call Gian Connacht. And for Druids and practitioners of Celtic mysticism, love talking is as normal as breathing. It's a part of our purpose as human beings. It is here, we are here to sing back to the sacred gratitude for the beauty of this world, the beauty of this life, and the great loving that we see all around us and that we are a part of. In the Celtic mystical tradition, love is the fundamental vibration of life. All life, everything emerges out of the lovemaking of the sacred three, of the goddess, the god, and the creator. That song of love sings within you through your lifetime, and it resonates with the truth of you and your purpose here. To seek that song of love is to come home to your soul and to come home to the sacred. And like the Sufis who began writing the poems that evolved into the Ghazal form so long ago, practitioners of Celtic mysticism like myself yearn for the beloved. And so the form is incredibly fitting for me. And I find it, there's an added layer of beauty to me writing in this format, because mystics and poets through the ages, since the 600s, right, have been using this form to honor and express their gratitude to the sacred and to the movements of life. Some of the Ghazal forms in the modern tradition, they show not only the beauty, but also some of the raggedness of life too, because of course the grace is hidden in those moments as well. We honor all of those movements, the challenging and the easy, right? So coming back to this idea of freedom in form, here, let me move back to, move to this one. So coming back to this idea of freedom in form, you know, there are aspects of my mystical practice that offer me structure. There are things that I do, meditation, ways of honoring the sacred, rituals that I offer. And for me, in my writing, the requirements of the Ghazal form are like that. It's very much like doing a ritual. Like you plan the outer container and the general flow. This is how it needs to flow. This is how things need to move. But what unfolds within that is the free domain of the poet. And like I said, because I practice this very deeply esoteric tradition, when I sink into those moments, those experiences of the lovemaking and of the loving that wash over me and wash over me and wash over me and create that refrain, that rhyming within the Ghazal of my poetry, the Ghazal, sometimes it takes me into this very expanded place where I have this incredible view of all these different pinpoint moments in life that are a part of that vibration, a part of that song, a part of that washing over me. And the form itself allows me to touch one of those, to take a snapshot of it almost, and then offer it up to you. And so it creates a structure for me within this very vast experience of life. And it's taken a while. Like I know, like Ben was saying, when you first start working with writing in form, you kind of get obsessed over the form itself, the requirements, and it can feel very limiting and confining almost. But once you really get it down and you start to feel the comfort of it, you don't think about it anymore. It's just part of the expression. It's kind of like, in a way, this isn't quite the best metaphor, but in a way, it's like learning to drive a stick shift car. I don't know if anybody's, here has ever learned to drive a manual car, right? When you're first learning, man, you have to focus. Okay, where's first? Yeah, and okay, I got to put the clutch down just this much far, and then I can move into second. And you have to really focus on it and focus on it. But after a while, you don't even think about it. It just becomes a part of you. Your hand, that body memory just knows this is how far I have to go, and this is the rhythm, and this is the timing of all of this. And writing in form to me is very much like that. It once you work with it and you bring it into you, it simply is there for you, and it allows you as a poet, I think, to open up and breathe much more deeply, because you always have that form to come back to. That form will always ground you. It's like rooted in that rhythm and the meter and the set of the form, my soul is free to wander. And I can stretch. I can stretch beyond anything I thought I could stretch in search of the beloved. And I can let my poetic vision drift with the beauty and seek the sacred in the vast diversity of its manifestations. And all the time I know that when I open my eyes, the structure of the Ghazal is always there to ground me. And it's always there to create an accessible medium for me to express and convey the vastness of what I've experienced, or the depth or the richness of the beauty that I've experienced. So I have a screen, the slide that's up on the screen right now has my email address and my Facebook page, as well as my blog site. I don't have a chapbook like Ben. Most of my poems have been single prints in different magazines and journals, but my blog through shamanseyes.wordpress.com does contain a lot of my Ghazals. You can find them there, and I do post them from time to time on my Facebook page as well. Let me come back out of this. So that's the bulk of what I had to say and to express about the Ghazal. I don't have a lot of books to show, but I will show this one. This is one of my favorites. It's Night, Mystery, and Light by J.K. McDowell. I don't think you can see his name there. This book is also written, these are all Ghazals that are written in the tercet form. And it's fabulous. I love it. I read it all the time. He also has a blog that you can find, Night, Mystery, and Light, if you want to read more. I do have one Robert Bly book. The soul is here for its own joy. This isn't exclusively terse ghazals, but there are a few that are in here. It's mainly a compendium of his writings. And then I have my own, this is fiction. Like I said, I don't have any poetry chapbooks, but I have my own fiction books. This is The Chalice and the Blade, Coming Home, and Being Here. All right, let's see, are there questions? I see Ben's, oh. So, okay, so there's a question about cultural differences found in these two forms. So both of them are global literature, or have become global literature. So haiku emerged out of the Japanese culture, and the ghazal emerged out of the Arabic culture, like I said, out of the Sufi tradition particularly. And ghazals are popular throughout Arabic communities, throughout South Asia. And like I said, they're starting to gain prominence now within North America and Europe within English-speaking communities. So they do come from very different traditions. Ben, did you have something else you wanted to say about that?
Well, no, I think that in that same sense, they started somewhere specific, but due to the other qualities about the form that speak to beyond just a specific place and time, that contemporary writers around the world have both embraced these for the reasons why the form is there, beyond just the idea that it's a structure. For everything that Jennifer talked about and what you see in her work, and certainly what I see in my work in a lot of in English language haiku. I say English language because God love the British, love them or hate them. We're very fortunate in the United States that English is kind of the default language for haiku across the globe. So it doesn't matter where you are, there are journals in Africa and in different parts of Europe and everywhere that all will have, if they have their own imprints, like Romania will have a journal in Romanian, but they'll also usually show the English versions as well. And the thing about them is they hit at things that are very human, the elements of us being human. When you're talking about a ghazal and it's talking about, you and the divine and the beloved, I mean, that stretches across really so many forms of different traditions and belief systems that all hit on that same elemental truth. And with haiku, it's about you being a human in the world around you. And so we are all human and we all inhabit at this one planet. And so it gets at things that are universal truths about us being people on this world. And that's where the forms themselves kind of cross over. And it's really nice to hear. Thank you, Jennifer, for a great talk. There's a lot of great stuff, a lot of overlap. So these were nice buddy pieces to put next to one another. And because they illustrate what else is going on and touching on that the humanity there. And, if you can read those poems that she put up on the board, I mean, they touch you today. They speak to today's world, especially the virus one. That was really funny. And it's just an amazing thing. And that's why they survived. There are many forms that didn't survive, right, but they have. And they thrive because they hit on these universal elements.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. So there's another question that's come up. Is there a deeper significance of the refrain, the spiral, and the spinning of the Sufi mystic? Something about always returning to the source, the beginning. So this digs a little bit deeper into the kind of mystical rhythm of the poem and that gentle blurring. But so the Sufis, spinning is a part of their ecstatic practice. They spin as a way, just like the shamanic practitioners drum, as a way of shifting their consciousness so that they can step into the other world and into relationship with the non-physical aspects of reality, and come into direct relationship with the divine. The Sufis spin to do this. This is their moment, their sonic driving, if you will. This is that mesmerizing rhythmic repetition that allows them to shift away from the physical experience and into the experience of soul and spirit. And for me, sometimes I haven't seen anything written about the Ghazal form that says this, but for me, very much that refrain, that repetition, it's a thread that links all of the different tercets. It's the thread that is common within them. There are other images that will often repeat within each of the tercets in order to link and interconnect and interweave the tercets into one poem. But that refrain is, like I said, it's like the water that keeps washing you and keeps washing you and keeps washing you as you read this poem. So in a way, it's almost like when I do a shamanic journey, there's always there's a reason. There's some question that I'm asking. There's something that I'm seeking as I go and step into the other world, whether it's wisdom, guidance, or healing. But there's a question that drives me, and it's like that refrain is like the spinning of the Sufi, like the beating of the drum, because it's the thing that keeps reverberating through me and through me and through me, that allows me to hone in on whatever the expression is that I'm bringing out as tercets. But it is also, it's the focus of that question, right? It's my compass within that particular writing. It's the thing that orients me to what aspect of life, what celebration of existence is emerging out into these tercets. So it's not always about returning to the source or back to the beginning. It's more about honing in on one aspect of that great thrumming that is the song of life. But it's a great question. Thank you, Emerald. There's another one that's just popped up here. There are Sufi brotherhoods in Francophone Africa, especially Senegal. Do you have any insights to how the Ghazals combine local and Arabic cultures? I don't. That's not an aspect of the tradition that I have explored. I know that some of there are Ghazals that are written in French as well. I know they're written, whether it be through some of the Francophone countries or from France itself, and some of the other French-speaking places, Canada. But I don't know how the Ghazal acts to combine cultures like that. I mean, there is a brotherhood of Ghazal poets, of course, right? We all work within this form, like haiku poets, I would imagine. Ben mentions he goes to these conferences for haiku, and I imagine that would be fantastic to hang out with a bunch of people who've embodied that form. I haven't had that experience. The Ghazal isn't quite as popular as haiku, right, just yet in our, again, in the English language community. And I don't speak Arabic, so I don't have that access. Oh, yes. So James mentions that the poetry of Hafiz was commonly used as an oracle. That sometimes those writings, you can use them like as a divination tool, right? Absolutely, but I'm not sure that was just a general comment, James, right? That wasn't, yeah, okay. Any other questions or comments? Just want to say thank you all. Thank you all for coming and taking time out of your day to be here. And I will put my blog information into the chat as well. And please do feel free to get in touch if you have any questions or if I can answer anything for you. Thank you, and benachti, blessings.
Yeah, thank you all for coming out. I know it's a little unusual for us to do a virtual workshop here, and we're going to have to do that for the next couple of months. We will have Jennifer put her information about her blog into the chat, and she won't close it. She'll wait a couple minutes before she closes out the Zoom so that everyone can copy that down, and then Jennifer Stolzer can put that into our Writers Guild Facebook page so that there's some record of it for you to go back to so that you have it. But I did just want to say thank you to everybody. Thank you to Ben and Jennifer for doing the workshop. I know it's a little bit harder to do it solely on Zoom, and there are always technical difficulties. And if Jennifer, if you wanted to send us your PowerPoint or any workshops or anything, and Ben, if you had anything you wanted to send like that, you could send that to Teresa or to the president's email, and we could put that up on the website to go with the Zoom. So thanks everyone for coming out, and all you guys have to do is click the X on the top right to get out of here. And like I said, Jennifer will wait just a minute or two so you can copy down all the information. So that's it. So thanks everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Yes, thank you so much. It was a lot of fun. Thanks, St. Louis Writers Guild, for continuing to have events like this where we can all connect and see each other's faces in little boxes on screens and and chat and talk writing. It's great.
And we have social closeness, even though we have physical distancing.
One thing I forgot, and I knew I was forgetting an announcement, and nobody on the board told me about this, so I'm going to have to shame them. But our poetry contest actually started on the 1st, just a couple of days ago. So go us. This quarantine has really got me. So it's the Deanne Wagner Poetry Contest, started April 1st and June 1st. Jennifer is actually the judge. So it's a blind judging though. So if you suck up to her, all she does is get gifts. She won't be able to choose you. But all the information is on our website on our contest page. So you guys can check that out. It's pretty simple to enter, and we'll have all the judging done by the end of June so that we can do our August open mic night. We'll have the winners read. So that's one more thing. I knew I was forgetting something, so I'm glad I caught everybody. But that's it. We're ending just a little bit early. Because it's a lot easier when we're not in person to actually come back on time. So that's all I wanted to say. The cats have abandoned us, so we'll see. STLWritersGuild.org. I can put that in the chat if you want to put that in the STLWritersGuild.org. So that's our website for you to find information about the poetry contest. Steve will, Jennifer, Steve will give you wine as a bribe.
I saw you put it right, terse it. I look forward to it, Steve. I'm ready.
Yeah.
Bring it.
He'll give you wine as a bribe, so you really want him to bribe you. Add the chocolates. So yeah, so that is it. Everyone click your X, and we'll put all this information up on our Facebook page and our website. And it will take a few days for the video and the audio to go up on the website, so don't panic if you don't see it right away. And like I said, if Jennifer and Ben wanted to add any worksheets, or anything, we can put those up too. So
yeah, I'll send you my my PowerPoint. So
yeah. So we can.
I put in every book that I raised up on the screen that was related to haiku. So there's a big list.
Yes. Yeah, Jennifer Stolzer put that on our Facebook page already. Yeah, Jennifer Stolzer is telling everybody, join us on the Facebook page if we want to chat anymore. And Ben and Jennifer are part of the Facebook page. They're pretty regular there. So if you have any questions for them, you can always post them there too. Just tag them.
Yep.
So yeah, okay. Well, then I guess that's it. Brad, I see you now. Are we good? Are we good for the video to X out? Yeah. Okay.
Yep. Totally.
All right. All right, Jennifer, you're in charge of the Zoom, so you can cancel us all now.